Welcome back to the Good Word, y'all. This is episode 6. We're here on the Ball Don't Lie Network on Yahoo Sports. We are also on YouTube where you can see my face and you see the face of the gentleman joining me. It is J.A. Adande. You guys all know who he is. He's an L.A. native. He spent over a decade at ESPN. He worked for the L.A. Times, also worked for the Chicago Sun-Times, if I remember correctly. You can remember seeing him on PTI, on Around the Horn, Sports Center, and now he's the director of sports journalism at Northwestern University, Medill School of Journalism, where he attended years ago. J.A., am I missing anything? Did I get the title correctly?
Got the title correctly. The only thing you left out of the last 3.5 decades of my life was 3 years at the Washington Post in the mid-'90s. 3 very critical years. Covered in the Olympics, Wimbledon, Jordan in the finals. So those are 3 great years that I had at the Washington Post.
Yeah, you worked for the major institutions. If you think about bigger markets, like you didn't work in New York, but you worked in Chicago, you worked in New York, you worked in LA where you were from. Like that's a pretty rare thing, especially because newspapers have been kind of sort of marginalized. Like that's not the road that people, will take anymore. So teaching journalism, like I know we're going to get into the playoffs and everything else, but since Jay started there, like I feel like we can just start there and then sort of meander our way back through groin shots and everything else that these playoffs have brought us. But like Jay, is it weird to not have the newspapers as like this beacon that it was 30 years ago or longer when Wilbon and everybody else of the generations past when they came through the path?
It's weird and it's sad. It's sad. The number one thing that today's journalists that are entering the field aren't going to get that we have from newspapers is editing. And I talk about the Washington Post. One of the best things that happened to me there was the editing that I got there that taught me how to become a better writer and travel. When you had those newspapers like the Washington Post and LA Times back in the day where they would just send you everywhere. And the opportunity to work at the Washington Post, where I got to cover an Olympics and a Wimbledon and NBA Finals and NCAA Final Four, all that stuff. And then to be a columnist at the LA Times when, again, they would send you everywhere. So more Super Bowls and Final Fours and Olympics and more Wimbledon and the World Cup. All these things that I got to cover, US Open tennis, the Masters. And I really feel like I might be the last person that got to do that. I was fortunate. I got a column at a really young age. I was 26 when I got the column with the LA Times. And newspapers were still sending their columnists all over the place, their sports columnists. And today, if a newspaper even has a columnist, they're certainly not sending them all over the country and all over the world. So all these experiences that I got to have, all these people that I got to meet, I really doubt there will be another person coming up today that will get to do all of those different things.
Yeah, we've become specialized. You know what I mean? Like in the ways that, you wind up covering one thing, you wind up rising through the ranks. Like we were having dinner with Wilbon in Phoenix or Scottsdale earlier, like maybe last week. And he was talking about after one season was over, you jumped on another season. He's like, when I covered the Big East, college basketball, like way back when, the John Thompson Big East, March Madness was over, I'd jump right to the NBA and then get on to the NBA playoffs. Like there was no, off season when he doing pro football, then you jump right to basketball. Like now every
and then you'd be back up in New York in September to cover the US Open.
Yep. Because everything wasn't 24/7. Like it wasn't mini camps, combine, off season, summer leagues, everything else. It was, but it wasn't as prevalent. So, but that's a detour. The journalism discussion, as we lament, for another day. Jay, I am in LA. It is quite early here in Los Angeles. It is, I want to say 8:15 LA time as we are here recording. JA is in Chicago, where I once lived for a number of years covering the Bulls, a team that's not in the playoffs and probably needs to figure some stuff out. But JA, we're in here in LA, so I figure we start there. You have Lakers Grizzlies, where Dylan Brooks has decided to play the victim. And he said, y'all made me out to be the villain. Now, Jay, I've never been to a playoff game at Staples for the Lakers until Saturday, where they had the doubleheader,
Wow.
Suns, Clippers, and
And,
then
and not just any playoff game. It was the first fully attended playoff game at Staples Center for the Lakers in 10 years.
and
So I could feel that pent up energy even coming through the TV.
I was gonna ask you. It felt like that Lakers crowd wanted blood, and I've been to games at Staples. They're a little more sit on their hands. You know what I mean? By and large, they sit on their hands a little bit. They wait for something to happen. That was not the case. I felt like that crowd kind of egged Dylan Brooks to get himself ejected. He was like, I've had enough of this. But just as a whole, what do you make of Lakers Grizzlies so far? I'm not going to say this series is over. Game 4 is tonight in LA. But what's the big picture takeaway that you look at this series? Is this a thing where Anthony Davis is becoming more of the barometer for this team than LeBron James, the change we've all been waiting for?
Absolutely. And we saw this a little bit during the bubble. The first couple series, I thought they kind of rose and fell with Anthony Davis, and he was the barometer. And even when LeBron would put up similar stats, if you looked at the plus minus, it reflected more. When Anthony Davis was playing well, it seemed to benefit the Lakers more. And I said that at the time, that the Lakers needed somebody to be the guy more than LeBron, and they needed someone that could take over and be the one or the 1A. And then in the last couple of series, especially in the finals, it became LeBron again. And then we really haven't seen Anthony Davis lead this team until this season. Earlier in the year, when they got off to that slow start, and Anthony Davis was the one that salvaged their season early on. And then when he came back and it was time for the playoff push. And here he is again. And yeah, you can measure how the Lakers are doing. He had that subpar performance in game 2, and that's their only loss so far. But when he's been Anthony Davis, when he's been the fully realized version of Anthony Davis, that's when the Lakers are at their best. I still think it's playing out really well for the Lakers because they've gotten by so far without LeBron having to exert himself too much. So I think it's good for them to know that he's got something in the tank, and maybe it'll play out like it did in the bubble, where Anthony Davis does the heavy lifting in the early rounds, and then LeBron comes in, for the final furlong or whatever, if you want to call it a horse race. And I think LeBron has that in him. He really hasn't been the same, though, Vinny, since he broke Kareem's record, right? And he hurt his foot. I don't think we've seen that much of LeBron until that Dallas game, that national TV Dallas game, where he went all out, and then he got hurt again and had to miss some more time.
Yeah, we're doing a lot of assuming. Like, it clearly, and I was in LA the night that he broke Kareem's record. It looked like he was going to break the record. Like, he was much more like aggressive and assertive and everything else. And it felt like, let me break this record so I can go sit down, so I can go rest whatever this thing is.
Go over to the Super Bowl in Phoenix.
go to the Super Bowl. Put the crown. Put the
crown on their head, right?
Jay, that is the corniest thing. That is beneath him at this point. What are you putting the crown on your head for?
Also, to do it at a football game, it's one thing to do it on the court. Like, if you hit a big 3-pointer and I'm the man, this is my territory, crown me. But they show you sitting in a suite at the Super Bowl, and you're going to put the crown on? Like, you the crown of what? The king of what?
Like, look.
That's not your court.
Well, here's the thing. Like, imagine being the kids, and the kids are around, and someone says something. Hey, LeBron, you're walking through the street, and he puts the crown in his head. You know how annoyed his teenage sons and that baby daughter has to be by watching their daddy put a crown on his head all the time. He has reached the stage of life where everybody does, where their dad becomes their dad. He becomes an old dude. That's what I wonder about the kids. Do you think he is that?
I mean, he's still, I don't know. If he shows up at the games, I mean, it's a big commotion, right? But do you think like, Bronny's like, oh, God, Dad, no, stop it. And, I mean, you also have a dad who can have you sitting courtside at the Laker game with all the celebrities when he becomes the all-time leading scorer. I mean, I don't know how you get more cool points as a dad than that, when you've got your family there watching you break Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's
because he's still your dad. That's why. All those other things make sense. He is still your daddy. And as great as all the perks may be, at the end of the day, they go home with him when ain't no cameras around and he walking around the house putting a crown on his head because he's eating some Fruity Pebbles. Ain't nobody got time for that. Dad, sit down, man. We ain't trying to deal with all that. But Jay, you brought up an interesting point about Anthony Davis because I remember in the 2020 bubble, I'd written that the changeover was happening after the first two games of the finals against Miami, and Anthony Davis was the clear, in a way, best player, finals MVP. He didn't get a good look the rest of that series. Let me just tell you that much, right? Funny how that happens. But I think I'd written, maybe this is the change, the Magic to Kareem change, where up until 86, it was a Kareem-led team. The 86 playoffs happened. They lost to Houston. They lost to Ralph Sampson, Hakeem Olajuwon in the West Finals in 5 games.
Michael Cooper is still laying on the baseline with his hands over his head in Inglewood.
The chalk
right?
outline.
He just crumpled to the floor as soon as that Ralph Sampson shot went in.
So after that, the Lakers say, we are turning this over to Magic. Magic wins 3 MVPs in the next 4 years. They win another 2 titles. I felt like that was happening. I feel like Anthony Davis is, in a way, A, in that spot, and then B, in the Pau Gasol spot, where I felt like there was a lot of skepticism of Pau after that first year in the finals when they lost to Boston and they got beat up and he had to toughen up. I feel like there's some parallels there with AD in both of those situations. Do you kind of see sort of the same thing?
I do, except you wonder if LeBron will relinquish the crown, so to speak, as easily and gracefully as Kareem did.
Mm-hmm.
I think I could see a point where they're sort of fighting for it, right? It was interesting when LeBron went to Miami and then when he went back to Cleveland. If you notice, the other stars, their usage rates had to go down, and LeBron stayed the same or increased.
Yep.
And there was a lot of talk like, oh, we're all in this together, 3 Musketeers thing, and we're all going to have to make sacrifices, right? LeBron's typically been like, I ain't going to be the one sacrificing. At least not when it comes to money time. He'll let other people shine during the regular season. But it has been interesting so far. Early in the playoffs, he was perfectly happy to let Hachimura and Austin Reeves and Anthony Davis have their time in the spotlight. I mean, I think it's nice to know he's got something. Maybe you wonder, though, if this is the time where he pushes the button and there's nothing in there, right? And if he can sense that.
That's what I was going to ask you. Are we sure that LeBron has this next level? And I say that on the morning of Game 4, and John Gennaro will delete this if LeBron goes for like 38 or something tonight, because Dylan Brooks is out there and LeBron just wants to spite everybody and spite this podcast. But Jay, are we sure that 20 years in and gravity taking a hold? I know he had that one crazy dunk in transition and everything else. So everybody's like, oh my God, year 20 LeBron.
He barely got over the rim on that reverse, by the way.
He look, when guys get more arms than head on dunks, that's how you know, right? You know what I mean? They head looking at the rim and all of that stuff. It ain't the same. Trust me, it ain't the same. It's incredible because me and LeBron are the same age. I'm actually 3 weeks older than him. And I couldn't dream of being that after all that wear and tear, right? But this is built for LeBron to be super LeBron. Even in a diminished Western Conference, can he be a super LeBron? Not even 4 times in the series. Can he be a super LeBron 2 or 3 times in the series?
That's the question. And I give him credit, though, for not taking the bait with Dylan Brooks. He came out and, I feel like he took the first 2 shots in Game 3, right?
Yeah.
And maybe he made his point, but he wasn't trying to go, MJ LeBradford Smith, so to speak, to use a way back reference.
Way back. We in the crates.
Watch The Last Dance if you're not up on that one. But and it's an interesting question, Vinny. Is it because he's choosing not to, or is it because he's recognizing that he can't? And at some point there will be a time where he is going to be called upon. In part because, are you confident that Anthony Davis can produce at the level he needs to for them to win 16 playoff games over the course of 16 playoff games, plus, the additional ones that they have to play because they lose some games. So it's a fascinating question. And this is why I love the NBA playoffs, Vinny, because they are about revelation and redemption. Everything is laid out there for you. There's no hiding. There's a harsh light that shines on everyone, and we reveal what happens. And if you mess up, you get a chance at redemption. Maybe this game will be the Dylan Brooks redemption game in game 4 of that series, but regardless of whether or not people seize the opportunity, the chance presents itself to redeem itself, whether it's in the series or over the course of your career. And this is why I love the NBA playoffs. Revelation and redemption, baby.
Jay, it's literally like you're going to figure out what TNT rerun is running throughout at 6 a.m. the next day. But like, it used to be Smallville, it used to be Law and Order. Now I think it's Charmed.
Right.
Now it's Charmed. Like, that's what you wind up waking up to the next morning. And man, Jay, I'm on the West Coast, so my body clock is all torn up. But even if I wasn't, you getting 3 or 4 hours of sleep a night. Like, I got to get used to this again. I'm not as young as I used to be. You know what I mean? Like,
you got to build up for the playoffs. Yeah.
Hey, we talking about, can LeBron rev it up for 16 games? Can Vinny rev it up for 16 games? You know what I'm saying? Like, this is tough. This is tough on your boy. Sometimes you tap out a little early. You miss inside the NBA.
It's harder on the East Coast, though, man. Saving up like it, and then, man, we had, as we taped this, game 4, the Timberwolves Nuggets series, that went overtime. I didn't appreciate that. And meanwhile, I'm watching my LA Kings. That game went overtime against Edmonton. So, yeah, these overtime games are extra hard. I actually had to tap out on the overtime in game 2 of the Kings series, but the LA Kings. I'm not built for this overtimes playoffs being in the Central Time Zone anymore. At my age, in my 50s, I can flat out say I'm not built for this anymore.
Hey, look, like I said, I don't get how Wilbon is. Wilbon is like the night owl for those who don't know. He's like the person that will call you at 3 a.m. and this is gonna be a bad Wilbon impersonation. Vinny, what the hell are you doing? Wilbon, I'm sleeping. Why aren't you up watching this shit? I'm like,
wake your ass up.
Yeah, man, that's what it is wake your ass up. That is the Wilbon thing. But it's funny, Jay, because we're in LA. I'm in LA, and the Clippers-Suns series, which it looks like the Suns are setting, right? It's hard
Clippers
to
are setting. The Suns are rising.
Yeah, Suns are rising. Clippers.
Get your metaphors right.
There you go. Sorry about that. The sun is setting on the Clippers season is what I was trying to say.
The Clippers should be sinking.
Jay, I'm looking at the Clippers. I want to touch on 2 things. The difference between Clipper fan and Laker fan, for one, but in the more, I guess, immediate thing. Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, I feel like if they get out of this series, they would have just as good of a chance as anybody in getting to the finals. They would have to get out of this series first. If they had their depth, if they had their 2 stars, the deepness of this team would have wound up, I think, winning out because, CP and KD and all those guys playing 44, 45 minutes wasn't going to work. But I can't think of another franchise that's had 2 superstars in or near their prime or close enough to their prime that can't get on the floor other than the LA Clippers with Chris Paul and Blake Griffin. There's a black cat running around this franchise. J.A., you make that deal 10 times out of 10, right?
Yeah, you had to. Especially, I mean, you make the trade, you trade all those picks and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander for Paul George because it means you can get Kawhi Leonard coming off carrying a team to a championship, and you hope he's got another one of those in him. You do that every time, and then I think they actually have played 21 playoff games together, which is astounding to me. I had no idea it was that many, but it sure seems like it's been a while since we saw both of them on the court in a playoff game. And at this point, you start to wonder if you're ever going to see it again, right? I mean, I guess they have no choice but to run it back, but can Kawhi be healthy enough? Are you just going to have to load manage him throughout the entire 82 games in order for him to, maybe bring him back with a couple weeks left to ramp him up? And then maybe he can get through the playoffs?
Jay, here's the thing. Can you keep signing up for this if you're the Clippers? Like, and this is the one thing I want people to understand. Like, let's take load management out of it. Like, just as far as purposes of this conversation, let's remove the phrase load managed because Kawhi Leonard, whether it's fair or not, is the face of load management. All-Stars are playing fewer games than ever, and he's not the only one. But he's actually coming off a legitimate debilitating injury. He's coming off of an ACL that we saw happen in real time. We saw that play against Utah. And we know
Vinny, I
ACL.
think it's fair to presume that there are some chronic issues as well with that knee, in addition to the acute injury, which was the ACL tear.
Which brings me to my next thing. Kawhi will be 32 in June, which is not old. He's still younger than KD, younger than Steph, younger than LeBron, right? But 32 is still 32. And if you have chronic knees and he has 1 year remaining on his contract and then a player option, if you are the Clippers, do you have to start at least entertaining the possibility? What does this look like moving forward? Because if the goal is the championship, and if the goal is, hey, we're moving into this brand new Intuit Dome, this super ambitious enterprise from Steve Ballmer, how long can you stay in the Kawhi Leonard and Paul George business?
You have to be able to pivot, and you have to realize that plans in the NBA now really don't even sustain for the length of time it takes to construct a building. Because you feel like when the Warriors brought in Kevin Durant, I felt like a big part of that was attached to as they were building the Chase Center, right? And that they were about to charge a ton of money for these suites and for these season tickets. And so you needed as flashy a product as possible. And so obviously the competitive reasons, you bring in Kevin Durant to try to pursue championships. But I also think that they were thinking, hey, we got a building to sell. Steph Curry isn't going to be able to play forever. You know, we need somebody with that star power to sell suites. And you figured the same mentality was going on with the Clippers, right? And what we saw with the Warriors was Chase Center open and Kevin Durant wasn't there on the roster. And so in some ways, I think that gives the Clippers a license. They're like, hey, we planned it this way. Things didn't go the way we planned. We're just going to have to open up the building with somebody new on the marquee or somebody different on the marquee, right? So I think you can't be so caught up in your grand vision for the franchise, including the facilities, that you can't do what's best for the roster. But also just getting back to, you know, this face of load management, that gets to my grand theme that I've been watching these playoffs with. And I want the results that will lead to us continuing to believe, whether or not we're believing in fairy tale or not. I want to believe that the regular season matters in the NBA. And so to have somebody kind of load manage his way throughout the regular season and then turn it on and win a championship, I don't want to see that. But it's weird because this series, like I'm rooting against both teams in a way, because I don't want to think that you can just bring in a number one guy like Kevin Durant, as the Suns did, have them play 8 games together during the regular season and then go on and win a championship that way. Like, I like to see things build gradually. And to me, you can build through free agency and trades, but like, it can't be instant, right? I'm not somebody that says, oh, you got to draft a team and, you know, all your players. Like, you don't have to do it the way the Warriors did.
Right.
But I just don't want to see instant teams. And I didn't consider the Heat an instant team because they still had to go through it, right? When they brought in LeBron and Chris Bosh to pair them with Dwayne Wade, they still had to go through it, right? They had to have their ups and downs along the way. They didn't just instantly. I mean, if they bring in Kevin Durant, they win the championship that way. What are we even doing in November and December in the NBA?
I slightly disagree with you, and here's why. The Suns did have the best record in the NBA last year with that team, with Mikal Bridges, with Cam Johnson, with Devin Booker, with CP3.
That was 2 years. Oh, yeah, last year. Right.
Last year. They got knocked out in the second round, and that run was over. Okay? I was at that game 7 with Dallas, and, you know, Chris Paul ran out of gas, and Devin Booker only had, you know, so much in him, and Luka Doncic and Jason Kidd and Dallas basically just ran roughshod in that game 7 in Phoenix. When you lose by 30 at home and you're the number 1 seed after winning 60 games, you have to recalibrate. You have to look at bringing in a player like Kevin Durant. And the year before, they went to the NBA Finals. So I felt like this is not your instant coffee team. I think that team had reached its ceiling, and it said this is as far as we can go. And I still don't think, J.A., that they're in a position that they're guaranteed to get out of the West. They got to go through Denver in the next round. Denver's deeper, and they've got Jokic. And if you're going to be running a Jamal Murray Jokic pick and roll against Chris Paul and DeAndre Ayton, you know what that means? Cue Clubber Lang in Rocky 3. Pain.
Predictions, pain. Well, but this is why I'm rooting for Denver, and this is why I've been so pleased with the way they've been playing, even with their loss in Game 4 to the Timberwolves. The Nuggets are good. They're not close out on the road good yet, right? They still have some learning to do, but
right.
But for the most part, they've been up to the task of being the number one seed. They performed as they should, and they've been rewarded as they should for being the number one seed with getting the Timberwolves. They tried to go to Cancun in Game 4.
They tried. They tried their best to end their season. What plane we getting on next? Bora Bora.
And I give Anthony Edwards a lot of credit for refusing to get on the plane just yet. But I love seeing what they're doing, and I would be happy. I would be distraught if the Bucks, who had the best overall season, can't get out of the first round. It would also take away, to me, my number one storyline in these playoffs, which was the opportunity for Giannis to enter that rare territory, that select company of players who have won multiple MVPs and multiple championships. We're talking Steph Curry and LeBron and Michael Jordan and Magic Johnson and Larry Bird and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Those types. That would be the company he'd be keeping. And he's really the only guy who can enter that club. Steph Curry's already in there,
yep.
and LeBron's in there. But like, of the guys playing this year, he's the only guy who could enter that club. And that's the highest thing we could see. Like, nobody else. Jokic would elevate to a new level if he gets a championship to go with his MVPs. But for Giannis to enter that rarefied air is a unique opportunity, and that's what I wanted to see happen in these playoffs. And now it looks like they might not even get out of the first round if his back can't get right.
Well, he's apparently slated to play Game 4, and I felt like, not necessarily like load managed or anything, but I think they were trying to figure out, hey, let's wait for as long a period as we can before we put him back out there with the way that he plays. And we know that we're not going to be able to control him from being like a crash test dummy sometimes and just going down the lane. So if that's going to happen and we're down 2-1, we feel like we can reasonably win a game in Miami, win our home games, get to the next round. Jay, I wasn't trying to go to the East yet. I had a rundown.
While we're here on Giannis, though, another thing I got to get off my chest. So I'm sorry, Vinny. I have to get these things off my chest when I can, because I don't have the platforms. I don't have a Yahoo Sports column like you do. I don't have my own podcast. So please allow me. Please indulge me here.
By all means.
So if Giannis goes down, John Morant came back big time. But those two injuries highlighted the need to get rid of the charge. And people say that, we're overreacting. No, let's get rid of it. It's the only play in basketball where you reward somebody for standing still. The objective in basketball should not be to stand still and defend the floor, right? You're trying to defend against the team scoring, putting the ball in the basket. So let's encourage the help defender. Let's encourage them to try to block shots instead of stand still and have somebody run into you and you get rewarded for that. And you put these superstars at risk of being injured. One thing I like about all these leagues, we've seen baseball react and shorten the games with the pitch clock. We see football react when people are really upset about the way, pass interference is called or something like that. And the NBA has reacted. They successfully got rid of the hackers, quote unquote, strategy. They got rid of all this nonsensical fouling guys who don't have the ball. We don't see that much, especially in the playoffs. Let's get rid of somebody standing still and running over to occupy a place on the floor and colliding with somebody or absorbing a collision. Let's get rid of that. Do we need to see that? Is that what we watch basketball for? Is to see people run to a place and stand still and have a superstar collide into them?
Just let me know when you're finished.
I'm done.
Okay.
I rest my case.
J.A. Adande, ladies and gentlemen. I can't believe I'm going to say this. I am so damn disappointed in you, J.A. You grew up in an
Are you a
era
secret Duke fan? You
by
love that
not
slap on the
never.
floor and
No,
taking
no, no,
charges?
no,
Is that what
not
you're
never.
caping for?
No, Duke is like the government. You never root for the government, right? Okay.
Well, if you're rooting for charges, you're rooting for Duke.
No, you're not rooting for charges, but you can't put it like this. Here's the best way I'll say it. All of the rules have been tilted towards embracing more and more offense, right? And I don't know about you, J.A. I don't want to see 150-point games. I don't want to go back and see 75-point games, but I don't want to see 150-point games. All the rules have been tilted towards offense. You've got to do something to give defenses a chance. And it's not that they're just
They have something. You know what? You can go up and block a shot. Defend the rim.
Everybody's not 7 feet tall, Jay. And you can't let offensive players bull into defensive players, run them. They're still going to lower their shoulders and run into dudes, even if there was no charge. Like, the incentive for an offensive player to lower that shoulder and lower the boom is still going to cause collisions. It's just not going to be offensive fouls with the way that you're saying. You've got to give defenses a chance. And furthermore, Ja Morant is an athletically gifted player. Something about decision-making and saying, hey, I can jump in the air without endangering myself. Like, because he jumps in the air sometimes, and he's very much under control, and he can land on 2 feet. But as someone who has broken his wrist playing basketball, I was reckless. And I landed on my wrist, and it cost me my senior year. So, you know what that taught me? You don't got to jump as high as you need to jump on everything all the time, J.A. So, no, I completely, vehemently disagree with you. I urge you to reconsider, J.A. Adande. I urge you to reconsider.
Respectfully. Here's the thing. I mean, you talk about it tilting toward the defense, and you talk about the advantage would or small men would be at a disadvantage. Well, how about we tilt things back to big men in the NBA? And so if we get rid of the charge, then there's a premium on rim defenders, on big men who can block a shot, who can defend at the rim rather than on the floor. So I would love for there to, and I think there still would be a place for the Kyle Lowrys in the NBA, but I just don't think that place should be their ability to occupy a spot on the floor and stand still. There's plenty of other ways that I think a Kyle Lowry could contribute without coming over as a help defender and planting himself and drawing charges.
All this comes down to, because we're going to talk about the Eastern Conference next. All this comes down to is one thing, Adande. These dudes need to make better decisions. Ja Morant was jumping in the air, and facing him was Anthony Davis. What do you hope to accomplish?
So, Vinny, you had your first, Staples Center playoff game experience, or at least first one in a while. So, have you experienced a playoff game in Madison Square Garden?
I have not. I have not experienced a playoff game.
You're missing out, man. That's one thing that's the same. The caliber of play on the court isn't the same, but that atmosphere there, and I would say this: the New York Knicks are the most overrated franchise in all of professional sports. Madison Square Garden is not overrated. Madison Square Garden is everything that they say it is and that people tell you it is. There's something about it that, like, the speakers are just better than everywhere else, right? The sound, the music, and the musical selections just sound better. The fans are into it. They're cheering at all the right times. They're savvy. They know the game. They know the history of the game. The energy in that building is unmatched.
You're right. Because when I'm looking at it on TV, I was looking at game 4 Sunday, a Sunday afternoon game. And, usually for those of us of a certain age, right? Sunday afternoon games on NBC. Saturday triple headers, right? Remember the triple headers, Jay? On NBC, we wake right up and we park that TV on one channel and not move, right?
Memorial Day games, yeah.
The Memorial Day games, absolutely. So New York is one of those places that they like to tell you how much they know basketball, how much they're into the game, that they know more than you, and Bing Bong and all that stuff. And last week I had Monica McNutt on, who does some stuff for MSG, and Monica, that's our girl here. I've never covered a game there, and it seems so desperate. That's the word. The desperation there, and it's desperation of like famous people. Like what? And I'm not a Bulls fan by any stretch, right? But never been a Bulls fan. Clearly, I'm from Detroit. All of that stuff. But the Charles Smith block, the despair on Knicks fans' faces, I will, because that's how much they wanted it.
And Vinny, the fact that for anyone who witnessed it, all you need to do is say those words, Vinny. Block, strip, block. They know exactly what you're talking about. And it just crushes their soul. They were so close. They were right there, and they put that up, and they go up 3-2, right? And they're going to close out the series probably. And it was just literally taken away from them, and they still haven't recovered. For 3 decades later?
Dude, that was the best moment of Scottie Pippen's career. Literally, the single greatest moment of Scottie Pippen's career was after Jordan got the strip, Pip block. Never seen a more defining moment for a Hall of Fame-ish player ever.
Marv Albert on the call. Smith again, block, Smith, blocked again.
John, we have to put that.
You got to drop that in.
John, we got to drop the call. We have to drop that call in there. It could hit like the frustration. It was almost like
the disbelief. Smith again.
So here's the thing, Jay, because the Oregon. Here's the one thing I am curious about, Jay, because now that you're seeing New York on this stage, and they're bludgeoning the Cleveland Cavaliers, right? They're beating them up on the boards. They're beating them up, period, in ways that I didn't know that we could have playoff basketball again. Like, I thought playoff basketball was just going to be this pretty exercise and, no rough play under the rim and everything else. I thought I had gotten legislated out. But, J.A., I wonder, because of the stage, and I don't know what the ratings numbers have been like or going to be like for that particular game, I wonder if that is going to incentivize the next big star who's unhappy in his situation or has free agency coming up to look at Madison Square Garden and to look at the Knicks and to look at that crowd and look at everything that comes with that and says, you know what? I want a piece of that.
I mean, that would be a first throughout the entire history of free agency, right? To have the top tier. Maury Stoudemire was a great player when he went there as a free agent.
Yep.
If you want to call Carmelo kind of he was traded there. He intended to play there though, right?
Right.
So we'll lump that in as a free agent who went to New York. But still, he's not on that LeBron tier. They couldn't get LeBron, KD, etc. They've never had that top superstar free agent. I'm trying to think of who could be coming up though that would want to go there. Like, the Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, down the road, somebody like that. So who's rising?
There's always
Jamal Murray or some, like
we never know.
And I'm saying this stuff without,
right.
looking up the contract status, but I'm
right.
I'm trying to think of like, who are the up and coming stars, the faces of the league who would want to go. I was thinking the same thing, Vinny. Like at some point, somebody's got to say like, oh man, I want Josh Hart just tweeted out a simple thing. I love the Garden. That's basically what he tweeted after the game. And so you wonder if other players are going to see that and say, but what guys have understood and recognized for years, it's funny. Magic Johnson used to kind of fantasize about it. Like, he'd say like, yeah, it'd be great to play at Madison Square Garden, and just would set off this frenzy, so a lot of people have speculated about it, but they all know, guess what? You get to play there once, maybe twice a year, regardless.
Yeah, you like
right.
That's a good enough. That's a good enough taste.
And this is one where you give Knicks fans credit. Like, they'll give it up if you come in a road jersey, even if road jerseys maybe aren't even a thing anymore. But you can come in as a visiting player, and if you show out at the Garden, they'll give it up. right? That they did for Jordan, they did for everyone else. So you can have the accolades of coming into the Garden and experiencing that and having one of those legendary performances in the Garden next to your name without the downside of paying New York taxes and playing for a team that's owned by Dolan.
Well, you asked next big free agent, and I didn't even think about this, but it just magically popped in, or maybe it popped in by our producer John Gennaro. You know who could be up for a contract? I won't say I won't call him a tier 1 top superstar, right? Because all the tier 1 top superstars are old. But the next best guy might be Jaylen Brown.
Interesting. But I don't think he's the guy that gets you to, he can't be a Patrick Ewing, what Ewing was for them.
No. He's another piece. He's another big piece. And in theory, and don't aggregate us here. You know what I mean? But you weaken the Celtics in their stronghold in the Eastern Conference, and you help the Knicks. And with Jalen Brunson doing all the work that he's doing, he's become a much better player than I ever could have imagined, even with the playoff run he had last year, Jay. Do you need that top tier superstar? Maybe like a Dame Lillard. You know what I mean? But Dame is starting to sort of into the back nine, of his career. He would probably be the best, closest superstar that people would think wants out. Nobody's saying Dame Lillard should want out and everything else. Like Portland don't do that. JA doesn't need it, and neither do I. Right? JA loves Portland and Vancouver way too much to be talking
big
about
fan of Pacific Northwest and Seattle.
And Seattle, of course. We gonna
bring back the Sonics.
There will be, I'm sure there will be a Sonics team there. But JA, put it like this: are the Knicks at a ceiling, or are they at like the start of something?
Maybe they can be what they were in the 90s, right? A good foil, a test to a team that's better. They never beat MJ. They took them to 7. They beat the Bulls the year MJ was retired.
Oh, maybe Sitting Bull? Do you mean Sitting Bull? Is that what you mean?
Don't start that, Vinny. We're not going to litigate MJ here. We got too much else to talk about. Speaking of 90s Bulls, though, we can talk some Phil Jackson, though, if you want to get into that. But because that does go back a ways. But, on this Knicks, they can be – it's interesting. I was thinking, seeing the Nuggets with the potential to go to the finals, something that they've never done, makes me think as an 80s NBA fan of we've lost – we don't respect and appreciate those Nuggets team that had a top 10 all-time scorer in Alex English and was fun. They were fast-paced. They were a fun team to watch. And they just, there was that logjam of the Lakers. But maybe the Knicks could be a team like that, right? Like a team that's there every year in the playoffs. What the Utah Jazz were in the 80s and the early part of the 90s, right? Like a formidable foe, a team that you're going to see every year in the playoffs. You're going to see them in the conference semis, in the conference. I don't think that's a bad ceiling to have. I respect the 80s Bucks and Spurs and Nuggets, and I respect the early 2000s Kings. We can talk Kings again if you want, those teams were fun. They created some great playoff matches. The best playoff series I think I ever covered was the 2002 finals between the Lakers and the Kings and all the dramatic swings that had. So if the Knicks can give us that on that stage that is Madison Square Garden, and put it this way, you don't think the Knicks fans would have a parade? They shut down 7th Avenue this weekend because they won a game in the middle of the first round. So if you think they're getting to the conference finals, the best moment of the Knicks have had since Willis Reed walked out the tunnel, right? The best moment they've had in the last 50 years was winning a conference finals game. When I think of the iconic Knicks moment of the last 50 years, is Patrick Ewing with his arms raised, and that's after they won the conference finals, right? That's not the confetti and the champagne for winning a championship. I bet you a lot of Knicks fans would think of that as their favorite moment too, right? I mean, there's not a lot of other contenders.
Here's the thing. In the NBA, if we think post-playoff expansion, that's what I consider modern NBA, post-playoff expansion of 16
I think
teams.
79-80.
Okay.
Magic and Bird enter the league, and a 3-point shot comes into the league. So I basically start my NBA with 79-80.
Right. I feel like 4 rounds of a playoffs is, with the grueling nature of it, even if the first round was 5 games and everything else. But we can argue and quibble, but whatever. There's only a handful of franchises that have really done real winning in modern NBA history. Like, of course, the Lakers won a bunch of championships. The Magic, then the Shaq Kobe, then the Kobe, then the Lakers got this last one. The Spurs, the Warriors, the Celtics, the Jordan Bulls, the Pistons. That's about 6 teams in about
Rockets
30.
Got a couple.
Rockets got a couple. Right. That's about 6 franchises in 40 years. So to your point, that means if you're making the second round of the playoffs and you're one of the top 8 teams in the league and you're helping build the fabric of the league, I think Twitter has kind of turned this into, maybe Hot Take TV has turned this into, if you're not winning the championship, then you are completely useless and you should tank and everything else. But man, there were a lot that adds the texture. Like, you talk about some of those great, like you said, the Sacramento Kings. Remember the Portland Trailblazers, the Clyde Drexler Portland Trailblazers, and then the Rasheed Wallace, Scottie Pippen Portland Trailblazers. They gave you some great playoff series. Like, you can name so many. Like, maybe one day I'll do that. I'll run down my top 25 playoff series of all time or something like that. Maybe John Gennaro me and John can come with a
lot of them
like
feature teams that never won a championship.
A lot of them feature teams that never won a championship.
It'd be great for the Knicks to again at least get back to where they were in the 90s. And my main problem with Knicks fans is they want that franchise to be spoken of among those teams that you just listed, right? Lakers, Celtics, Bulls, Spurs, like Pistons even. They want them to be spoken of in that category when they're not. You got 2. You're the Houston Rockets, right? When it comes to championships,
you're not even right,
because the Rockets have basically done it in our viewing lifetime. That modern era that you spoke of, right? Which the Knicks have basically not been a part of. But that doesn't mean they haven't given us stuff. When they show Bernard King at the games, and I'm like, do people realize who they're looking at? When you see Bernard King sitting courtside, respect that man and what he did. And that man does not get his due accolades. For those of us who watched him, that man used to do work in the playoffs with his fingers taped together, splits on his hands, and he would still drop 40, man, against your boy Zeke. Like those Pistons.
Zeke wasn't guarding him. It was Kelly Tripucka guarding them.
Yeah, but they were back and forth.
Yes, they were.
It was Zeke doing on one side, Isaiah on one side, Bernard King on the other. Neither of those teams won the championship that year.
Nope.
That was a great series. I watched it on the USA Network. That's how long ago that was. But so there's value in that, is what I'm saying. Don't overvalue them. But that's the problem. Just don't get carried away and act like this, you should be spoken of alongside the Celtics and the Lakers. No. But let's get more playoff games in Madison Square Garden. Let's add another team to that tier, right? And let's have some great playoffs. How about the Cleveland Cavaliers of the 90s that Jordan went up against?
Yeah,
right?
Mark Price.
Those were some great players.
Brad Daugherty,
right?
Larry Nance.
Right?
Yeah, Ron Harper before he got traded. Yeah, really good teams.
Those teams.
It adds to the Indiana Pacers of Reggie Miller, the Seattle Sonics. Like those teams add to the fabric, giving us some great playoff series. Of course, you're going to have the Charles Barkleys that never won a championship, and we have to hear about it every time Shaq wants to say something, every time Kenny Smith wants to say something really funny and entertaining, by the way. But that's what it is. So, J.A., you've opened the door to Philip. I hadn't even thought about Philip this morning. I was trying not to think about Philip. But Phil Jackson, for those who don't know, Phil, I guess he was on was he on a podcast like Rick Rubin or something like that?
He was on a podcast, yeah.
And he made a statement, folks. And he said, I haven't watched the NBA since 2020. Of the slogans on the floor, and people are trying to
jerseys.
the jersey, the sayings on the back. People trying to watch that to get away from everything. And I was trying to figure out, like, A, how long has it been since we said the name Phil Jackson? B, haven't we realized that Phil Jackson has always been this dude? Remember the posse comment that he made about LeBron James and his friends. Now you're talking about his agent and his manager, all these accomplished people. He was calling them posse. Remember all the comments about Carmelo Anthony, Allen Iverson. Phil Jackson has been this dude, J.A., for a long time. And as someone who was around Phil Jackson, before Phil became this old white man, when he was just a regular old white man, are you surprised that Phil has gotten here? Like, are you surprised that he's gotten here in the past 20 years is what I'm saying.
No, he's a baby boomer. And this is the arc of the baby boomer. They were marching in the streets in the 1960s, and then they got older, had families, businesses, and became corporate side. Remember, he was doing ads for investment firms, right? He became very much establishment, as generations tend to do. But that generation, I think, had the most dramatic swing from who they were in their 20s, which was like the 1960s era, to who they became in their 50s, 60s, 70s. From the idealism to, the Who saying, hope I die before I get old,
right.
to becoming old themselves and very much the establishment. So it's a normal path, and it's the path that his generation has taken. But B, we've seen the signs, the seeds being planted throughout, including right when he took over the Lakers in 1999 and became the Lakers coach. I'll never forget, one of his first practices, if not his very first practice, media day, and he's standing on the court at the Forum, and he's talking about the hip hop generation and how they have a short attention spans, and it's basically made it hard to teach them. So he starts going in on the hip hop generation way back in the 90s. And then some of the other comments you mentioned. And then the one that really came to mind was in the 2010 Western Conference Finals, the Suns versus the Lakers. And the state of Arizona had just passed this very controversial bill, which essentially allowed law enforcement to stop anyone at will and demand them to show their
freedom papers,
proof of ID. Right. You had to show your ID, your legal papers. And, basically it was giving cops a license to stop any Latino looking person that they wanted to and make them prove that they lived there, whether or not they commit. So it used to be, if you were in the act of a crime, or if you were arrested for committing a crime or a suspected crime, then you had to show ID. But now that you could just be walking down the street and they could stop you and say, hey, show me ID. And you could just imagine how that would be abused, particularly under Sheriff Joe Arpaio. So Robert Sarver, to his credit, weighed in by having his sons wear the Los Suns jerseys, the NBA Noche Latina jerseys that they would wear. And so he showed what side he was on. And I figured Phil Jackson, product of the 60s, who had once worn a Bill Bradley for president, Democratic candidate for president campaign button, his former New York Knicks teammate, he wore a Bill Bradley campaign button on his suit during a nationally televised game. Very intentional, right?
Right.
Bringing politics very much into the mix. So I just kind of assumed, I thought I knew where he would go with this. I didn't want it to be controversial. And I asked him what he thought about the bill. And he basically said he was in favor. He basically said, well, isn't it the law that you have to have ID? And he says, aren't they just basically putting some teeth into the federal law that exists? And to my discredit, I wasn't as up to speed on all the details of the law, but I did fire back. I said, well, no, actually they're usurping the federal law, which was the problem that a lot of people had. Federal law didn't give law enforcement the right to go up and demand papers whenever they wanted to. This was going above and beyond federal law, and in the state of Arizona, we could do that. And so Phil was basically saying he was on board with it, which caught me by surprise, and which led to some people having a protest outside the then Staples Center before the next playoff game, and Phil kind of having to walk it back. And I felt bad just because he hadn't gone out. I brought this in, right? It's the middle of the playoffs, and I introduced this controversy where Phil didn't do this of his own, right? So I actually felt bad and apologized to him. I didn't think it would turn into that big a deal, in part because I didn't think he would take that side on it. But he did take that side. So I apologize for doing that to him in the middle of the playoffs. But it was telling, right? And that's why this current stance, this opinion, these views that he's expressing does not surprise me, because I've seen and maybe he was always this way.
Right.
We assume just because he had long hair that his political beliefs were a certain way. But remember, he's a product of a minister in the Dakotas, growing up in the middle of the 20th century. So, what is that going to lead to? What values, what belief system? We thought just because he might wave some sage around and do some yoga poses, that changes who he is and what he was taught and how he grew up.
We don't know these people. You know what I mean? we don't know.
Well, but we kind of know. The thing is what I'm saying. Like, having been around him, for 30 years, I can't say that I'm shocked. Because we've seen some things like
we've seen the evolution.
Jackson wrote a really good column, right? That's how you want to phrase it. Scoop Jackson called him out on this way back when. He was like, "Yo, Phil, you're my guy. You coached my team, the Bulls. I follow you. Revolutionary, visionary ideas, all this, that, the other." But he's like, "I can't with you, Phil," which was basically what I'm saying. Like you can't keep going at hip hop culture and young black men like this, as you've done. And this was, I don't know, 10 or so years ago, 15 years ago, maybe, that Scoop wrote that column. So I'd urge you to look it up.
I remember the column. I won't have to reread it, but I remember the column. And the thing that struck out to me was that Phil had been around young black men. He had been around younger black reporters. You weren't the only one. It wasn't a whole lot of us. It's never a lot of us.
No, but I mean, it was Wilbon. It was, even Terry Armour at the Chicago Tribune, David Dupree. They're to the extent that there were black reporters covering the league, Phil had been around, and Roy S. Johnson, the national guys, all the guys on the Knicks beat, Lacey Banks in Chicago,
Lacey Banks, absolutely,
plenty.
Yeah, and for him to have been around so many, and the one thing, Phil was a master of language too. Remember the war of words he used to get into it with Chuck Daly, lobbying for cause, and Pat Riley. He knows the power of words, and he would choose these words in every instance, every time, knowing the triggers that it's setting off. You can't make excuses, and clearly neither one of us are, but he is clearly showing us who he is, and that's fine, right? But
it's okay to have these views, and I still cherish the time that I spent with him. I've learned so much basketball from him. I've just his demeanor. Vinny covering just the pregame sessions with Phil Jackson. Just regular season game number 35, Phil's pregame media availability. You would look forward to those because he could tell you stories from 50 years in the NBA, right? Going back to the late 60s. And then he would speak about anything and everything, right? So he would talk about social issues or anything that was going on in the NBA. And he wouldn't hold back his opinion. And, I think, again, people get older and our opinions diverge maybe. So I'm not going to call him out for speaking his mind just because I disagree with him when I was waving the pom-poms for all those years when he would speak out and I happen to agree with him, right? So I just say I'm disappointed, but I'm not surprised is the best way that I can summarize it, because I have seen this timeline going and the direction that it's been headed in. So I'm not surprised. It's just disappointing when the people that you've ridden with and ride for are holding views and values that are contrary to yours. I feel like there is a place in sports for championing equality, right?
Yeah.
What is sport? Why do we celebrate Jackie Robinson every April 15th? Because he was a champion in more ways than one for equality in our country. And what the NBA did along those lines in the bubble and has done and has continued to do in a lot of ways, I'm in favor of that. Phil Jackson is not. We disagree there.
Ladies and gentlemen, that is J.A. Adande. And J.A., I had a bunch of stuff I wanted to hit on. I wanted to hit on the Draymond Green doing the A-Town stomp. I want to hit on Dylan Brooks. You got to tell me if you weren't reaching for LeBron's, you got to tell me what you were doing with a bald fist near a man's, what. But we had such a good podcast and we didn't hit on all of that stuff. I hope you guys enjoyed it. J.A., once again, Medill professor, ESPN, LA Times, Chicago Sun-Times, Washington Post. Most importantly, a good friend of mine, someone that I could lean on and ask for advice through the years. I really, really, really appreciate you, man. Thanks for joining with us.
Great to wrap with you, Vinny, and thanks for having me on.
Hey, that is J.A. Adande. This is The Good Word. Remember, we are on every Monday on Yahoo Sports on the Ball Don't Lie Network. We're also on YouTube. Don't forget to give us 5-star reviews. Let us know what you think of the show. John Gennaro, behind the glass, helping us out today. Thank you, sir. Once again, I think we're going to have No Cap Room on Thursday. Jake and Dan, and we will see you next Monday. Have a safe week, guys.